This story occurred about 10 years ago when I was around 20 years old. I had been working and still do work at a little Ma and Pa health food store in Virginia for a few months. It's a truly lovely, tight-knit staff with an owner who is basically a mother to me. The other older ladies were my best friends and more aunt-like than anything. Of course, being the youngest lady working here, I got a lot of hours and ended up closing shop many nights. Soon, I was comfortable enough to be closing by myself too. We had a regular customer that had been coming in for quite a few years before I started there. He was a local holistic doctor, a brilliant one at that. He was around 40 years of age, divorced and well-to-do. He spent a ton of money at that shop, sometimes taking an entire car full of groceries home in fact. Needless to say, the owner was pleased to have his business. The first time I met him, he said, "Well, hello there, I'm Dr. Malloy, and I don't think we've met." He stuck out his hand and displayed a charming smile, and I'll admit he was quite handsome, very nice and funny too. My co-worker Pam stood a little to the side, and she sort of gave me a look that said, be careful with this one. Sort of a sixth sense thing that she has going on. She was, and still is, very protective of me, and she said, "Oh yeah, this is Diana. She just started here." And he replied, "Well, nice to meet you, Diana. I'm sure it's nice to have some young blood around here." That was a bit rude and creepy, I admit, but whatever. He was just trying to be nice, I suppose. Anyway, he took his sweet time and chit-chatted about what he did, how successful he was, and how he will be, coming in more often to see my pretty face. He made sure my co-workers didn't hear that part, though. So, fast forward a few more months, and this guy's been coming in almost nightly, specifically when he knew I'd be there alone. Basically, he was right there as I was closing, which would annoy the shit out of me, but I was too nice and knew that we needed the business. And then began the usual inappropriate questions like, "How old are you? Where do you live? You must have a boyfriend. You know, if you ever need any help with your health, or if you need guidance, I can be of service. I also have a home office." I always answered very vaguely, and I never told him where I lived. One Thanksgiving, he even asked me if I was a good cook and if I would mind coming over and cooking a turkey for him. And my answer was a definite no. At this point, I informed my boyfriend Jackson, now husband, that this guy is creeping me out. I told him that he would likely be in the store on Friday night, and if he could please come in to keep me company while I began to close, that would be awesome. So my boyfriend comes in, and not a few minutes later, Dr. Malloy comes in and looks stunned when he sees my boyfriend. I look at boyfriend and nod, and Dr. Malloy says, "Hey buddy," in a condescending tone, of course. His whole demeanor has changed, and his eyes are dead holes and fixed on me like I had betrayed him or something. My boyfriend is leaning on the counter as Dr. Malloy is piling stuff on quickly and silently. I should also mention that my boyfriend is a 6'7" scruffy bearded mountain of a man, and he's wearing his cycling clothes. Dr. Malloy checks out and says, "See you soon," and ignores my boyfriend and leaves, winking at me. My boyfriend is noticeably pissed, and he watches Dr. Malloy go out to his car. The next day, Dr. Malloy confronts me about my boyfriend. "Was that him, your boyfriend? He's a real bro, huh?" It was snarky and pompous, and I say, "Yeah, he's actually really wonderful." Now, Jackson starts staying with me to close whenever he can, and Dr. Malloy starts waiting for me to go on break and follows me, trying to eat with me at the cafe nearby. The ladies are getting really annoyed at this point, and I start hiding. You know, all that type of stuff. Well, I get a pretty bad rib injury on my bike and stay home one day. I lived in a very secluded, old apartment, a 15-minute walk away that sits above an old art gallery. And that day, my friend Wojtek was visiting from Germany. I was so excited to see my best friend, and he brought me food and coffee, and we were just chilling inside catching up when there were 2 knocks at the door and someone asking, "Is anybody home?" And I recognized that voice anywhere. What the actual F is this guy doing? I open it, and it's Dr. Malloy holding a large suitcase. He said, "I heard you were injured, and I brought my acupuncture supplies, and I'd like to gift you with a session." And he tries to just walk in. My friend is baffled, and I say, "No thanks. My friend is visiting, and he's taking care of me." He looks at my friend, and his eyes are filled with rage. He says, "I came all the way here for you, and this is what I get. Oh, and you have 2 boyfriends? Disgusting." At this point, my friend steps between us and tells him to leave and shuts the door. Dr. Malloy bangs on the door, cussing and flipping the hell out, and eventually he leaves. I told the ladies and my boyfriend too, and my boyfriend is enraged and wants to go and kill this guy, but things calm down for a bit and Dr. Malloy goes away for a minute. But now his roommate starts scouting me out for him, asking me if I'd like to come over for dinner to their place and have some fun. That Dr. Malloy misses me, and obviously I'm pissed and tell this guy to piss off. This friend of his just wasn't right too. Like pedophile not right. Now, at D-Day, Dr. Malloy waits in front of the store as I leave for a break. My boyfriend is on the way to take me out, and Dr. Malloy stops me and says, "I'm taking you." I tell him no, I'm going to eat with my boyfriend and to just please leave me alone and just stop. And he says, "No, I'm taking you to Montana. Get in my car, leave your boyfriend. I can take care of you for the rest of your life, and I need a wife, and I know you love me. Don't lie to me." Mind you, he's saying all this through his teeth, quietly and angrily, almost with rage. He's holding onto my wrist and trying to drag me away when Pam busts the door open, screaming and pulling his shoulders. Dr. Malloy grabs my hair, basically ripping it out of my head. And then my other hero, Jackson, runs over and tackles this piece of shit and puts him into a headlock. Everyone's yelling and losing it, and I'm silent and in shock. The police are called, and he's arrested and in cuffs, and the last thing he says is, "Your ass is mine." Obviously, a restraining order ensues. I didn't press charges though, because we were about to move anyhow, and I knew I was protected at work. Anyway, years later, I also found some information about him, and apparently he's older than he led me to believe too. Which really creeps me out too, because not only did this guy want to take me to wherever the hell he was going to take me, but he was lying to me the entire time. I've had a severe case of agoraphobia since I was 6 years old. I'm 19 now and female. It was 2005 or 6 at the time, and I live in a country where there's no psychiatrists for kids, only regular doctors, but they weren't really helpful anyway. Nobody knew what was wrong with me until 2012 when I was finally diagnosed. So, me and my parents and the rest of the family were desperate and felt helpless. And then, someone my parents knew well informed us to see a hypnotherapist in a few towns away from ours. We went to meet the man, and don't ask me how I managed to keep my panic attacks at bay during the trip, but somehow I did. He was in his late 60s, early 70s, and seemed really nice, and he seemed to understand me too. Didn't think I was a nutjob, you know? Anyway, I saw a salvation in him and kind of looked at him as my grandparent, if that makes sense. There were some red flags, of course, but as a 6-year-old child, I missed them all totally. My mother was always afraid of him because he insisted on doing the therapy alone with me in another room while she waited. The first few sessions, they were mostly okay, I guess. Not really helpful, but okay. That is, until one day. I asked him, already lying on his couch, if I could go to the toilet, to which he replied with, "Do you need to pee or poo?" Sure, it was a weird question, but I thought he asked it to know how long I would be in the toilet. But boy, was I wrong. I answered that I needed to pee, and he put his fingers on my lady parts. This got me really confused, and I still, of course, had no idea about any of this type of stuff, but it still felt weird and I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't tell my parents, but I cried a lot and thought that I needed to just suck it up and that I'll no longer be afraid and have panic attacks and such if I just got through with this. Since then, he didn't do it anymore, thank God, and he called my parents on regular basis when he came home, asking them to let me go on vacation with him, which, of course, they politely declined. A few years later, and he's arrested for child pornography, and apparently for sexually abusing a few boys. It all clicked in my head, and I told my parents everything, and we went to the police and gave statements, and that was pretty much it. Apparently, he died in prison of natural causes. Reflecting back on the whole thing, I can definitely see how he was trying to groom me and how I was in very vulnerable positions with him. And I'm pretty certain that if those sessions had kept going, something worse would have happened for sure. In 2010, I gave birth to my middle child. He was born with some serious health issues and ended up being hospitalized for several weeks when he was only a couple of weeks old. Because he was so small, there wasn't a whole lot the doctors could do to help improve his condition, other than IVs and breathing machines and round-the-clock supervision. There wasn't much that they could do. It was such a hard time, and my husband and I, we were a wreck. The doctors told us that it was really just a wait-and-see type of scenario, and we should just spend as much time as possible with him and hope for the best. And so, that's what we did. My husband was a store manager at a well-known supercenter at the time and used his vacation time to be at the hospital with us. By the time his vacation ended, our son was still in the hospital, somewhat improving, but it was still really touch and go, and my husband felt like he needed to be there with us. And so he asked for some more time off, and it was granted. He was told to just call and let them know when he could return, and they'd put him back on schedule. As soon as our son was well enough to come home, my husband called his job to let them know that he was able to return to work. Turns out, because of his attendance, they decided to demote him to another position. He'd be making less money, but not a significant amount, and we could honestly understand where his employer was coming from because they were generous with the time off they allowed him, and that our son's health issues weren't really their problem. I mean, he's an employee and he's supposed to be there. Whatever. We could still survive on his new salary, so it was no big deal. Within 2 weeks of returning to work, my husband got injured at work though. In order to continue working, his employer said that he had to go to physical therapy before he could return. So, he was out of work again, so soon after returning too. After a few weeks of physical therapy, he was cleared to return to work, but his employer started drastically cutting his hours, and after all the expenses we incurred with our son's health issues, and my husband being out of work, our savings were almost entirely gone, and we were not going to be able to keep up with the expenses much longer. At that time, my son had a lot of issues that required me to be able to be home and give him treatment for, and I couldn't return to work either, so my husband started looking for another job with full-time hours so that we could make ends meet. He quickly found a new job, making significantly less money, but still, it was more than what he was making with his current employer's cut hours, so he took it and intended to keep looking for another job as well. We are steadily falling behind on bills and rent and trying to put food on the table for our 2 children and provide everything a new baby needs, and we realize that we're not going to be able to continue living the way we're living. We explained this to our extremely kind landlord and were allowed out of our lease. We begin looking for a cheaper place with a short lease so that when things pick up, we can move into a better place again. Eventually, we found a place that was incredibly cheap and ended up moving into it. It was in a bad part of town, yeah. A part of Dallas that's well known for being a bad part of town, and if you're in Dallas, then you probably know exactly where I'm talking about. However, I'm homeschooling my daughter, and our son is too small, so I'm not worried about them going to school in the area, and I figured it's only a few months, and when my husband is at work, the kids will stay inside. We were in a desperate situation, and I was just trying to be positive, and we would make do with what we had until we could do better. But let me just say that this place is a complete shithole. It used to be a house, but is now a complex, and most of the other houses on our street are abandoned and have been vandalized, including both houses on each side of our home, and the street just looks generally scary. However, our next door neighbours are extremely kind, and it put me at ease having them next to us, because if anything were to go wrong, they'd be right there. A couple of weeks into being there, I start to relax a little bit. It's a crap area for sure, and not many people live on our street, but the few people that I do meet were really cordial, and I didn't get any bad vibes from them at all. Mostly older people, and a few families, and seemingly no shady characters, much to my surprise. Because of those factors, I begin to feel more comfortable with the area, and think maybe I'm just judging it too harshly because of how run down it is, and because it's known as a notoriously bad town. So I begin to think that just because it's run down doesn't mean everyone that lives here has bad intentions. So instead of sitting in my backyard to smoke cigarettes, I started sitting on my front porch. And that was a huge mistake. As I'm sitting there smoking my cigarette, people watching, I see a man walk down the street that I've not seen before, which isn't totally unusual in this type of neighborhood, so I just remain vigilant, but also don't think much of it until my dog, which was just a small elderly, well-behaved wiener dog, started losing her mind when she noticed him. This is not normal behavior for her, and she never barked at anyone, but when she started barking, the guy stops dead in his tracks and stares directly at me and my dog and starts pounding on his chest and throwing his arms in the air like, "Come at me, bro." I was freaked out, and I was about to turn and go inside with my dog when something overcame her and she sprinted right off my porch and directly toward the nut job in the street. When he saw that she meant business, he started walking away quickly, but still, my dog kept following him and barking her tiny little ass off, and I was in shock. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to get my dog, but I didn't want to walk up to this man at all. This whole ordeal went on for several seconds, and then the man turned around and started yelling at my dog, threatening her and making stomping motions like he was going to stomp on her head. I was scared, and I wanted to protect my dog, so I ran out to the street and scooped her up and ran inside. I heard the man yell behind me as I was running in that he was sorry. I went in, locked my doors, and tried to calm down and not let my kids see that I was shaken up. A few hours go by, and I just wanted another cigarette, but I didn't want to go back out to the front to smoke, so I was just going to sit on my back porch when I realized that I had forgotten my cigarettes and lighter at the front. I cautiously looked out onto the street from the window to make sure the creep from earlier was good and gone before stepping out. But the porch is large and long, and from the window, you can't really see the bench that sits between my door and my neighbor's door. And when I step out, I'm absolutely stunned to see the man from earlier sitting on my porch, on the bench between our doors. I admittedly kind of froze up, and before I could say or do anything, he said he wanted to apologize for earlier, but he didn't want to scare me by knocking on my door. Okay, yeah, so just give me a heart attack by sitting on my porch and waiting for me to find you sitting there hours later, right? And how did he know that I'd even come back out anyway? He explains that he was just afraid of dogs and he wasn't going to hurt my dog. He was just hoping to scare it off. I'm lost for words, and I kind of just nod my head and wait for him to leave. But he doesn't leave. He just sits there, staring at me. This continued for a minute before my daughter broke the silence by coming to the door and saying that my pot of water is boiling over. And this is when I really started panicking, because now he knows that I have kids and I'm obviously home alone, no car in the driveway, and at this time my phone was out of service too. It was a hard time and I just couldn't afford my phone bill, so I'm terrified about everything that could happen. The neighbors aren't home, and I don't have the car, and there's no way of calling anyone, and I just felt sick to my stomach. I tell my daughter to go sit down and that I'm coming, and I tell the man that I have to go, and I book it into the house faster than I've ever moved in my life. I keep looking at the blinds for the man to leave, and after about 5 minutes, he walks away. 10 minutes later, there's a knock at my window. Yes, my window, and I peek out, and it's the man. I reach over to the fireplace and grab my poker, just in case, and I very, very slightly crack the window. He asks me if dinner is done and if he can have some food. I tell him that I don't have enough and I'm sorry, and he goes on to explain that he's homeless and he hasn't eaten in days and he's starving. I know it's really stupid, but I have a soft spot for helping the homeless, and I hate seeing people go hungry, so I told him that if he would go stand across the street at the park while I put a plate of food on the porch for him, that I would give him something to eat and drink, and he agreed, and he stayed across the street while I placed the food on the porch. And after he ate, he left. When my husband got home, he found the used dishes on our porch, and I told him what it was about, and he scolded me. And rightfully so, I must say. After that, days went by and I didn't see the man again. I just assumed that he was just a passerby, down on his luck, and that he was genuinely afraid of tiny dogs, wasn't well socialized, and meant no harm, really. But, boy, was I wrong. Shocking, I know. Eventually, I started seeing him walk down the street again. Occasionally, he'd see me through the window, smile and wave, and that went on without incident for about 2 weeks, off and on. Then, one day, my dog starts flying off the handle, flipping her shit again, and I assume it's because my neighbour's rather large pit bull had gotten into our side of the backyard. It was not the first time, but the dog was a real sweetheart, so unless my dog is bothered by her, I don't complain about her being there. And I went to let my neighbour know so he could come and get her. When I stepped out, my neighbour's car is gone, and the man is again sitting on the bench, but doesn't even seem to realise that I'm there. He's just sitting there, slapping himself in the face, drooling and scratching his face and neck. He's rocking back and forth and talking to himself, saying all types of shit that I can't understand, and he doesn't seem to hear my dog barking or notice anything that's going on around him. I'm thoroughly afraid of what I'm seeing, and I don't say a word, and I just quietly back up and go back inside to figure out how to get this guy off my porch. And then I remembered that he's scared of dogs, and maybe if he sees my neighbour's giant pit bull, he'll snap the hell out of whatever trance he's in and move along. My next move is undoubtedly stupid, but I'm worried about this man sitting on my porch while my kids are home and my husband and neighbours are gone, so I want his ass to go the hell away. So I grab my dog's leash, go to my backyard and put the leash on my neighbour's dog. I tell my daughter to get our dog and go to the back bedroom, lock the door and sit in there and watch TV while her brother is napping, and she does. I then gather all my freaking courage and walk this massive pit bull around to my front porch and just stand there waiting for this lunatic to snap out of it and realise that I have a huge dog out here and hope that he's just going to run off. Cookie, my neighbour's dog, starts barking upon seeing him, and finally he slowly looks up and smiles, that absolute creepiest smile that I've ever seen, and says, "Hey there, I didn't know you had 2 dogs." He said this normally in a really normal tone, as if he hadn't just been acting like some kind of psycho, talking to himself and doing all sorts of other odd shit. So I said, "Yeah, but she really doesn't like people she doesn't know, and sometimes she bites." He got a terrified look on his face and actually jumped over the railing rather than walking past this dog and I. When my husband came home, the creeper was again walking down the street and stopped to talk to my husband this time. I see the interaction in the driveway and I step out to see what's going on, and apparently he's asking my husband to bum a cigarette. My husband honestly didn't have any on him, and I was out too, so we told him that we didn't have any. Also, this is the first time my husband had ever seen this man, so he had no idea who he was at this time. The man said, "Okay, fine, can I just have some water?" giving my husband the same homeless spiel that he'd given me. My husband, who also has a lot of compassion for the homeless, gave him a few dollars and told him to go in and fill up a jug of water and give it to him, which I did. He handed him the water and walked to the porch, and when he got up to the steps, we hear the man cussing under his breath and talking to himself, and turn around to see him pouring out the water we'd just given him, calling us bitches and all sorts of names, and we just kind of look at each other like, what the hell is going on? He then calmly turns around and throws the empty jug of water on the ground, and then proceeds to pull a full packet of cigarettes out of his pocket and throw it at us. What the hell? I mean, he was just asking for a cigarette, and he was mad that we didn't have any, and it turns out that he already had a pack, and then he throws them at us. My husband told him to get the hell out of the driveway and to just never come back again, and I told my husband that he was the guy that had been coming around, and I thought he was on drugs and had some serious mental issues or something. After this, my husband immediately calls to have my phone turned on and starts having his dad stay with the kids and I while he's at work. Once Crazy sees that my father-in-law is there at all times now, we start seeing less of him, and actually, I only saw him once after this, and that was in the back of a police car at a nearby gas station. More on that in a minute. After not seeing him for a while and thinking that he got the hint, we come out one morning to find that there's poopy toilet paper all over our lawn and porch. We immediately know that it was him, and we ask all the neighbours if they saw anything, and they claim they haven't. So we don't bother calling the police because we know that there's not much that they can really do without proof. I mean, we didn't even know the guy's name. Plus, the cops in this area are known not to be so great anyhow, so it just all felt like a dead end. After the toilet paper incident, though, there's 2 more shit-related instances where poo was smeared all over our windshield, and then another time on our front door, along with, you guessed it, toilet paper strewn everywhere. A week or so after the poo incidences, we're pulling up to a gas station and see him in handcuffs on the curb in front of the store. I never found out why, but man, was I so happy to see him being put into a police car. After that, we ended up moving to Austin and getting as far away as we could from that situation. Things are great now, and my husband has an amazing job, my children are doing wonderfully, and we've never lived anywhere like that again. I don't know whatever became of him, but I pray that he got the help that he needed. Because when he was sitting on my porch that day and just acting all crazy like he did, I knew then that he could hurt someone, possibly even children. Probably around 2 years ago, I had gotten a job at a certain Australian rip-off steakhouse in my hometown. I was really excited to start this job because it had been the first time I'd had a job while in school that year due to how busy I was. It was a nice healthy distraction from constant schoolwork and extracurriculars. And plus, I was getting paid, and being able to afford food was a fun thought. In fact, I don't think I'd ever been so excited to buy hamburger meat. Anyway, my days there were a lot of fun, but we had this one horrible mean manager named Steven that would get super upset and angry at other employees, but he would never get upset at me. Steven was probably in his mid-60s, and he was the kind of guy who you could just tell hadn't been happy with how his life had turned out. Now, I was a super hard worker and liked my job, but there was definitely some times that I deserved to get yelled at. But he never would. Like, never raised his voice at me. In fact, it got so bad that all of my co-workers started making jokes that I was Steven's favourite. It got to the point where I'd be on shifts with some other girls and he would rip into them for stuff that was definitely wrong on both of our parts, but would never get angry at me. Eventually, I wasn't capable of putting up with the poor treatment of my co-workers anymore and pulled another manager, Elliot, aside to see how I could file a complaint and get justice for my fellow servers. Elliot and I became super close since I started working there, and when he sat down with me, he held me as I cried over my uncertainty. This job meant the world to me, and honestly, I didn't want to lose it. He reassured me, though, that it was all right and that he would handle it. Over the next few weeks, he would make me feel better whenever something happened, and he constantly reassured me that action from corporate was coming. About 2 months after the original complaint, I had decided on taking a vacation to Texas to visit my mother. I said bye to everyone at work for a whole 2 weeks and had so much fun hanging out with my mum that I forgot about work. It was easily the break that I definitely needed from the work environment. Not too long after I get back from my vacation, I come back to work, and just after a few shifts, I realize that Elliot isn't there anymore. I figured that Stephen had fired him for standing up, and I was livid. In my anger, I started talking to my co-workers about the bullshit, and they all looked confused and baffled by what I was saying. After stopping mid-sentence and asking them why they were looking at me like that, a co-worker corrected me and told me that that's not why he got fired at all. Apparently, Elliot had been caught keeping 2 8-year-old boys in his basement. Elliot was arrested, and that's why he was fired. Apparently, he had also been caught in the past for publicly urinating on a 7-year-old and beating his own children who got taken away from him permanently when he went to prison for the first time. Both boys were safely returned to their parents, but they'd been there for at least 2 months from what I was told. Needless to say, I was done with that restaurant at that point, and I just quit on the spot. But when I think back on just how much I trusted Elliot, how he lured me in with his niceness and politeness, it gives me chills.